Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Zeke-ollege football. I'm so excited to bring you this episode. I've been looking forward to it for the past couple weeks. Unfortunately, some life things sort of getting in the way. Uh, Finals starting to ramp up for me here, but you know, I'm excited. Hopefully, you're excited, and we're back to the conference previews. Now, we last left off with the Big 12, but it's good to keep things nice and big because today we're talking about the Big 10. And this is a conference that is new, it's exciting, um, it has a lot of recognizable names in it. Uh, and I, for one, can't wait. Uh, so let's just do it. Let's just get into it. I think it's best to start off sort of at the top. We're just going to work down alphabetically. Uh, so we're going to start off with Illinois. Now, Illinois had a little bit of a disappointing year last year. Uh, 5-7 record overall in year three. It's now year four for Brett Bielema. Now, the starting quarterback room most likely going to stay pretty consistent here. Luke Altmaier, he was the starter. He did get hurt during the year, which did contribute to their losing record, but he's going to be the quarterback. Big thing for him is turnovers, turnovers, turnovers. He had a lot of those last year. Has to cut down. Uh, you know, 13 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. Other than that, not too bad quarterback play, but when you're turning the ball over, it really, puts your team in a bad place. So the running back room going to be a little bit thinner as well. Now, it's important to note we are still in the spring transfer portal window, so they could look to address that during this transfer portal window. But as of right now, running back room a little thin. Their leading rusher last year, Reggie Love, is transferring over to Purdue. Now, moving on, let's talk about Indiana. Indiana, one of those teams who has consistently been in the cellar. They had one good year in 2020 with now who we now know is the number 8 overall pick in this past year's draft, Michael Penix Jr., before he transferred out. Um, and last year was another string of disappointments. 3-9, Tom Allen gets fired, and they bring in Curt Cignetti from James Madison. So, you know, you see a team that's sort of wondering, what is my identity? They bring in Curtis Rourke, the transfer from Ohio, the University of Ohio. So he's going to be the starter. Their starting quarterback last year did transfer out of the program. Um, but you have some uh, good news coming. Mainly the fact that their leading wide receiver decided to withdraw his name from the portal. So he's going to be returning. Donovan McCulley will be back in 2024. But they did suffer a lot of players going into the transfer portal. Now, some players coming out of the transfer portal as well. A couple coming over from James Madison following Cignetti. But, I wouldn't expect year one for Kurt to really push the needle all that much. Maybe some slight improvement, but he's certainly going to have to get a couple of recruiting classes in before we see some change there. Now, let's talk about Iowa. Oh boy, where do we start with Iowa football? Iowa's one of those teams where they win, but it is some of the ugliest football you've ever seen, at least on the offensive end. Uh, it's going to be year 26 for Brian Ferentz, the longest tenured collegiate head coach at a single school. Um, 10-4 last year, and that was remarkable because their offense was anemic, to put it lightly. They won the Big Ten West, but you look at these offensive statistics, and it's mind-boggling. 9 total passing touchdowns, a total of 20 offensive touchdowns on the season. Uh, it was just ugly, ugly, ugly football. Um, Deacon Hill, the quarterback they had starting for most of the year, decided to enter the transfer portal. He lost a quarterback battle to Cade McNamara. McNamara tore his ACL last season, so he's coming back from that injury, and he'll most likely be the starting quarterback next year. But the big news coming out of Kinnick Stadium is a new offensive scheme. Brian, pardon me, it's Kirk Ferentz is the head coach. His son was Brian Ferentz, and he was the offensive coordinator for the Hawkeyes last year, and they were just awful. So Brian Ferentz got the boot. Tim Lester coming in for the new offensive scheme. The big question on everyone's mind: can Iowa score offensive points? And that we'll have to wait and see whether that can be the case. Next up, we're gonna touch on Maryland. Year 6 for Mike Locksley. They were 8-5 last year. Their biggest loss came from a graduation and entering into the NFL draft for their quarterback Talia Tagovailoa to his younger brother. So there's going to be a bit of QB competition over in Maryland. Billy Edwards and Cameron Edge, we saw them both play in that bowl game win over Auburn. And then MJ Morris, who's coming in from NC State, trying to win the starting job. They did add some offensive line help in the portal, but not a lot of activity. Now, let's touch on Michigan. Michigan, where do we start? Last year's national champions, 15-0, but they had a lot of players hit the NFL draft. So it's going to be a little bit of a different team. Jim Harbaugh left for the Chargers. So it'll be Sharon Moore taking over. He had a couple wins when he was an interim coach. Donovan Edwards is going to be back at running back, which is huge for them. And then the most likely starter from what I've seen is going to be Alex Orji. So a bit of a new scheme for Michigan, some more run-heavy packages, and including quarterback runs a lot more. But yeah, I would expect some regression from Michigan. I don't think they're going to go undefeated again. Whether or not they, make the 12-team playoff, we'll see. But I certainly wouldn't say that they dominate like they did last year. You can't lose that many people and still stay the same. Let's talk about Michigan State now. Spartans had a rough year. 4-8 last year. Mel Tucker, their head coach, was fired for sexual misconduct. It wasn't a great time to be a Spartan. They had a lot of players hit the portal, but many of them did opt to return when they announced that they were hiring Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. So he's going to be in year one in East Lansing, and then uh, Aiden Childs followed Smith over from Oregon State, so he's most likely going to be the starting quarterback over at Michigan State. A very talented player, 4-star. Jonathan Smith just finds a way to make the most out of not having a lot. He's made those Oregon State teams that were really weren't very competitive to be pretty competitive. So I like him a lot as a coach. I think we're gonna see a definitely a new look for Michigan State next year. Minnesota up next. Um, so PJ Fleck still at the helm over in Minnesota. He's been there for a little bit. Um, Obviously PJ Fleck most known for his time at Western Michigan. So as he's heading into his 8th year um, with the Golden Gophers, it's starting to really settle in. Okay, where's the ceiling here for Minnesota? They went 6-7 last year, but they are seemingly regressing a little bit. Their peak was in 2019, 11-2 season, reached number 10 in the nation, but they've started to lose players and not be able to properly replace them. Max Brosmer, coming over from New Hampshire, will be the starting quarterback. Darius Taylor and C.A. Bangura to be running backs, but I'm not sold on Minnesota really taking that jump and really cementing themselves as a team to be really threatened by. I don't see a lot of improvement there. Next up, let's touch on Nebraska. Year 2 for Matt Rule, former coach at Baylor, Temple, and the Carolina Panthers. 5-7 last year. Heinrich Harburg, either him or the true freshman Dylan Raiola will be the starting quarterback. Biggest portal addition is Isaiah Nair from Texas. Now, Rule teams typically have a rough year 1, good improvement in year 2, a great performance in year 3, and then he usually goes on to a different job. So if we follow that pattern, this should be a big year for Nebraska. That being said, last year didn't necessarily follow that pattern either. 5-7 was a lot better of a record than most Matt Rule teams have in year 1. So I don't know how steep that improvement will be, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Now to Northwestern. It's going to be year 2 for David Braun. He was an interim coach after Pat Fitzgerald was fired before the start of last season. He went 8-5, which at Northwestern is fantastic. They were 1-11 the year before that, so a lot to like there. Brendan Sullivan back at quarterback. The big concern is running back depth, but as we continue through the spring portal window, gonna try to look to figure that out and get that squared away. Now, Ohio State. Now, admittedly, I don't like Ohio State. I'll come out and say it. I don't like them one bit. I don't like their fans. I don't like their team. But as much as I hate Ohio State, I can't deny that they have a lot of talent coming in to this year. So it's gonna be year 6 for Ryan Day. They were 11-2 last year, which is uh kind of irks me to say this, but that is a disappointing year for them. Um, so out goes Kyle McCord, out goes Julian Fleming at wide receiver, and they do pick up some big names in the portal. Will Howard coming over from Kansas State, he'll compete with most likely Devin Brown uh, for that quarterback spot. They pick up Quinshon Judkins from Ole Miss, Caleb Downs from Alabama. And then they also have people who are coming back to play another year just to really uh, get that momentum. It's one of those teams where they have a lot on their shoulders right now. You've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row now, and there are players on this team who have not beaten Michigan, and they really want to. Players like JT Tuimoloau or JT Tuimoloau, I think is how you pronounce that. Travion Henderson. Uh, you know, big name players who will make an impact and will most certainly be drafted. Decide to return. Denzel Burke, another example at cornerback. So a lot of these talented players want to come back, want to get that win over Michigan, and they have really reloaded, so they should be a team to look out for next season. Now, Oregon. You might be wondering, what? Oregon? I thought you were talking about the Big Ten, not the Pac-12. Well, the Pac-12's dead. So if you didn't know that, sorry to break it to you. There are 4 teams that joined the Big Ten this year: Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. Out of those teams, I think that Oregon is probably in the best spot to compete in year 1. They were 12-2 last year. It's year 3 for Dan Lanning. Now, Bo Nix went off to the NFL draft, number 12 overall pick. He's gone. But they bring in Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma to be the starting quarterback. They add Dante Moore to be a very good option as a backup quarterback. They had Evan Stewart from Texas A&M to be a wide receiver for them. Their biggest loss in the portal was Ty Thompson, but you sort of replaced Ty Thompson with Dante Moore there for that backup role. I think Oregon is certainly one of those teams to look out for. Now, they do have, some concerns. Can they get over the hump and beat Washington? I don't know. But, you know, at least in this next season, they're a team to look out for. Penn State, year 11 for James Franklin. They were 10-3 last year, with losses to Michigan, Ohio State, and Ole Miss in the bowl game. Now, for the past couple of years, Penn State has been playing what we call 2-game seasons. Their entire season revolves around their results against Michigan and Ohio State. And for the past couple of years, they have been consistently losing to Michigan and Ohio State. So, where does that leave us this year? They don't face both of those teams. They only face Ohio State. They don't face Michigan this year. I think that Penn State is in a spot where they can safely say they're one of the best teams in college football, but they're still in that echelon below some of these better teams. Um, Drew Aller's going to be back at quarterback. He didn't really push the ball down the field that much, and they've lost a lot of their receiver room to the transfer portal. But the biggest addition in the portal was Julian Fleming coming over from Ohio State. So they have at least one good receiver to to um to throw to at least. Definitely more of a run heavy team. Uh More heavy set packages, bring in tight ends and everything like that. Let's talk about Purdue. Uh the Boilermakers 4-8 last year. It's gonna be year two for Ryan Walters. Hudson Card's gonna be back. Although, again, most of the wide receiver room entered into the transfer portal. They were able to add two Georgia wide receivers, Denylon Morissette and CJ Smith. And then they were also able to bring over Reggie Love from Illinois. And then trying to speed this along a little bit, Rutgers, they were 7-6 last year under Greg Schiano. Gavin Wimsatt versus Athan Kaliakmanis for the quarterback battle. Kaliakmanis, former Minnesota starting quarterback, entered into the portal with his brother Dino Kaliakmanis, and those two were the biggest additions in the portal for Rutgers. Now UCLA, it's year one for Deshaun Foster. Chip Kelly decided to leave the UCLA head coaching job to be a coordinator at Ohio State. There was a schism between him and the athletic department. Uh, Ethan Garber is going to be the quarterback. The other quarterbacks on the roster transferred out, so Dante Moore's gone, Colin Schlee's gone. Uh, and then the biggest addition for them is probably Rico Flores Jr. out of Notre Dame. Not a huge big name player. So it's going to be interesting to see how they do in year one, uh, especially in terms of travel. They have a very tough schedule. They have to face off against Oregon and Penn State and USC and Washington and Iowa. They also have an out of conference game at LSU in Death Valley. Like it's a tough slate for them. So gonna be interesting to see how Deshaun Foster does, and how UCLA will do. Now, USC. It's year three for Lincoln Riley there. They were 8-5 last year. The biggest thing is no more Caleb Williams. He went number one overall in the NFL draft, former Heisman winner. He's gone. But we did see a lot of promise in the bowl game against Louisville. Miller Moss came in, threw his first 7 touchdowns. So he's most likely going to be quarterback for next season. Zachariah Branch, he was an electric freshman last year. He's back at wide receiver. Biggest change, I would say, it has to be the portal. Huge losses include Dorian Singer, Malachi Nelson, who was slated to be their backup quarterback, Mario Williams and Michael Jackson, two of their wide receivers. Some of the gains, Jordan Maeva over from UNLV. He's going to fill in that backup quarterback role. Jaquavius Marks, who is a running back from Mississippi State. So there are certainly players who will make an impact. And I almost forgot to mention the biggest change for USC next year, which is a different defensive coordinator. And for most people, that's not a huge thing, but for USC fans, it is a welcome change. Alex Grinch is gone. he commanded one of the worst defensive units in college football. So if they even get average uh, defensive play uh, as opposed to what they have been getting, I could see their win total skyrocketing. Washington, University of Washington. It's going to be year one for Jed Fish. Came over from Arizona. Kalen DeBoer, the head coach from last year, got hired to be the head coach of Alabama after Nick Saban retired. So 14-1, they made it to the national championship game. A lot of their star players went to the NFL draft. Michael Penix Jr., Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, uh, McMillan. Like there was a lot of big name players that they lost. Um, they will have a new starting quarterback, Will Rogers, coming over from Mississippi State. Their biggest losses in the portal were probably Jabbar Muhammad, one of their starting cornerbacks, Austin Mack and Dylan Morris. So two different quarterbacks as well. And then their biggest additions are probably Jonah Coleman from Arizona and Ephesians Prysock, who has just a really fun name to say. I mean, just give it a try on your own. Ephesians Prysock is got to be up there for most for the all name team if I was to make one. And then Wisconsin. It's going to be year two for Luke Fickell. They were 7-6 last year. Tyler Van Dyke coming over from Miami to be the starting quarterback. Their biggest gains were probably TVD and then also Tawee Walker from Oklahoma. So that will do it for the preview section. Let's get to these predictions. Let's start off with the teams that I think are probably going to do the best. We'll go from best to worst. Ohio State. I don't think it's any surprise. I think Ohio State is going to have a phenomenal year. I don't see them going undefeated, though. I see them, dropping the game at Oregon, but I do see them picking up that win in against Michigan at home. So I see them going 11-1 and 8-1 in conference play. Now, to Oregon, I see them also going 11-1, but I see them dropping a game to Michigan. On the road in the Big House, it's going to be a tough environment. I see them beating Ohio State in Autzen, but dropping that game to Michigan. So 11-1 and 8-1 in conference for the Ducks. Now for Michigan, I see them going 8-1 in conference, the one loss coming to Ohio State, but I see them going 10-2 because I think they'll lose to Texas in week 2. So 10-2 for Michigan, a step back for sure. You never want to lose to Ohio State, but they're still going to be at least close to contention for the college football playoffs. Penn State, I see them going 10-2 as well. 7-2 in conference play, losses to USC and Ohio State. Now, on to USC. I see them going 9-3. I see them losing to Michigan on the road. I see them losing to Washington on the road. And I see them losing to LSU in that neutral siter to start off the season. So I see them going 7-2 in conference with that 9-3 record. For Washington, I see them also going 9-3. Their biggest wins come against USC and Iowa. But I think they lose to Michigan. I think they lose at Penn State. And I think they lose at Oregon to end the season. So 9-3, 6-3 in conference. Now, another team with that same record, Iowa. I see them going 9-3 as well, with losses to Ohio State on the road, Washington, and Michigan State on the road as well. So 9-3, 6-3 in conference for Iowa. Now on to Michigan State. I see them going 8-4 and 5-4 in conference play. I think they lose to Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, and then I think they'll lose one at Illinois late in the season. It's one of those games where you sort of overlook it a little bit. Both of those teams coming off a bye week before that game, so uh, it's going to be interesting. But I think 8-4 record for Michigan State there. Next up we have Maryland. So I see them going 7-5, 4-5 in conference. Now, Maryland typically has good starts to the year, but does collapse later on. And I don't see this being very different. I see them, starting off the season going 5-1, and then picking up 2 more wins later on to get to 7-5. Now, moving forward to some of the other bowl eligible teams, I see Illinois making a bowl game, going 6-6. Biggest win against Michigan State, and then also at Nebraska as well. Another team that I see going 6-6 is Wisconsin. They have a tough schedule. Out of conference schedule includes Alabama on there. They have to face off against USC, Penn State, Iowa, Oregon. So definitely a tough outlook for them. But 6-6, 4-5 for both Wisconsin and Illinois. And then we have a couple teams who I think just barely miss a bowl game. 5-7 season again for Nebraska. I think they just have a tough slate, and there are a couple games that might go 50-50 here, but if they could pick up a game against Colorado per se, or a game against UCLA maybe, or even pick up a win at Indiana, I think it's one of those games where I think Indiana might be able to win that one due to some of the inexperience of the quarterbacks over Nebraska. But I saw them going 5-7, 3-6 in conference. Now another team that I saw going 5-7, 3-6 in conference was UCLA. Another tough slate. Again, that road game at LSU. They have to face off against Oregon and Penn State on the road, Iowa, at Washington, USC. Some of these really good teams in the Big Ten. And I saw them picking up wins against Fresno State, Hawaii, Indiana, Minnesota, and Nebraska. But 5-7, 3-6 in conference for the Bruins. Now, Northwestern, I saw them going 5-7 as well. Only 2-7 in conference. They have a pretty easy out-of-conference slate. Miami, Ohio might give them a little trouble, the defending MAC champions, but I think Northwestern might have the edge over them. But, tough sledding throughout the rest of the conference slate for the Wildcats. Now to Indiana, I see them going 4-8, picking up wins against FIU, Western Illinois, and Charlotte, as well as that game against Nebraska. I see them going 1-8 in conference, though. I don't see them winning any other games outside of that Nebraska game. Rutgers, I see going 4-8 as well. Just some tough schedules. I think they pick up wins against UCLA, Minnesota, Howard, Akron, but not much else. And then down towards the cellar, we have Purdue at 3-9, 2-7 in conference. I see them picking up wins against Indiana State, Northwestern, and Indiana. But I think they lose pretty much every other game here. They're just not a team that I'm very high on right now. And then finally, to round it all out, I think Minnesota will really struggle this year. Lost to North Carolina before beating Rhode Island and Nevada. They'll pick up other wins against Illinois, but I think that's it. So 3-9, 1-8 in conference play. And that will do it for the Big Ten preview. If you have any questions, if you disagree with my opinion, if you agree with my opinion, drop that down in the comment section below. Go ahead and give the Instagram a follow at Zeke.ollegefootball. So Zeke.ollegefootball for all your college football needs. That's where you'll find updates as well as what the next episode's topic will be. So with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you all next week.